Seara Gourmet apresenta a sua mortadela duplamente defumada. Ela é gourmet em todos os sentidos. Veja, toque, sinta, prove. Mortadela Seara Gourmet, duplamente defumada.
Tendências mudam sempre. E uma empresa tem duas opções: esperar a mudança ou liderar o caminho. Nós escolhemos estar à frente, conectar pessoas e negócios de um jeito inteligente. Nos envolvemos e aprendemos para oferecer soluções melhores. Porque a única coisa que nunca vai mudar é a nossa vontade de inovar para todo mundo crescer. Alelo é tudo isso.
I would like to thank you, Terry Erdo, the Chief Operating Officer of National Rest Association, for being here to give us some very important information to our market. And it's a part of the 33rd National Congress of Brazil. Of course, I'd like to say hello to all the attendees and all the participants of Brazil Congress. Thank you so much. I'd like to say hello, please, Mr. Terry, if you want to join us, it's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much, Marco. And I'm honored to be here representing the National Restaurant Association. You know, it's particularly meaningful to me to be able to join you in Brazil. It's a country I have traveled to many times in my career, both in food service and in technology. And the one thing that I always came away with was an incredible sense of hospitality, the vibrancy of the food service industry, the restaurants from Rio to Sao Paulo, which I've been able to visit both areas. It's an important part of your way of life, as it is here in the U.S. So, you know, the National Restaurant Association represents really the entire cross-section of the food service industry and every segment of food service in the United States. We're very much committed to collaboration and being a knowledge center. So sharing the kinds of things that we're going to talk about today is really why we exist. Very honored to be talking about really what's happening in the U.S. right now. Certainly we have come through an unprecedented year dealing with COVID-19. And so it'll be interesting to talk a little bit about what we did, but even more important, really what we're going to do going forward and how we see the entire hospitality industry continue to rebound and what we hope to do in the restaurant industry going forward. So we're slowly climbing out of a year's worth of a lot of pandemic hurdles, both, healthcare, we had healthcare economic hurdles, we had a lot of political hurdles, we have in the U.S., we have different laws in different states and many restaurant owners that span all those different states. So they have political things that they have to deal with, which are very, very difficult. It's been a tough year for our industry. But to give you a sense of where things stand in the U.S. right now, I'll give you some statistics. And some of these, as I was sharing with you earlier, Marco, changed a little bit just even in the last week. But at the end of June, U.S. restaurant sales had really posted a pretty healthy increase. We have had a lot of people returning to work. We've had a lot of government programs where we have injected some cash back into the pockets of American citizens. And so people really were looking for a way to burn off their pent-up savings and their pent-up need for socialization and experiences and human touch. They needed to be in touch with other humans. And so eating and drinking places sales in June were up 2.3% for May. I suspect July will probably be up as well. We don't have the July numbers, having just closed, which would give us 6 out of the last 7 months. Now, interestingly, what we've started to see is a little bit of an ebbing of that exuberance over the last couple of weeks. And I think it's the Delta variant that we've all heard about, coupled with some of our major cities that have kind of reinstated the mask mandate for vaccinated as well as unvaccinated people inside. So I think, fortunately, in the summertime in the U.S., most of the U.S. can feed people outside as well, outdoors. And so I think we may have a little bit of a cushion going through the next couple of months while we get a hold of this Delta variant and while our vaccination numbers continue to rise. But the downside of all of it is that in the first 13 months of the pandemic, we saw what we calculate roughly $290 billion in lost sales in restaurants in the U.S. That is a large number. When we started at about 900 to 950 billion was our original estimate for 2020. So we've seen a major hit. Now we've seen a lot of them come back. We've seen about 90,000 restaurants close permanently or at least long term. That's a shocking number. That's a very large number, like 10%. But it was higher when we estimated it 4 or 5 months ago. So that's a little bit better than what we thought 4 or 5 months ago. The vast majority of permanently closed restaurants were well-established businesses. They were fixtures in their communities, just as they are in Sao Paulo and in Rio and up north. On average, the restaurants had been in business for 16 years, and at least 15-20% of them had been open between 25 and 30 years. So these weren't little startups that just started and stopped because of the pandemic. These were parts of the community, and that's the big loss. We've also seen wholesale food prices rise rather sharply in recent months. We've seen energy prices rise, and that is a part of the impact. There are labor shortages, which is part of the impact, but the wholesale food prices are up nearly 10% up over their year-ago price level. And that is a huge jump when you're starting to try to feed that into your menu pricing and trying to run an operation that has a small margin to begin with. Restaurant employment also continued to recover, which was good news. Industry payrolls expanded by more than 1 million jobs during the first half of 2021. A part of that were restaurant workers, and certainly despite gaining some across the board, we are still something on the order of 1.1 to 1.3 million jobs below pre-pandemic levels in the U.S. So given that we had about 15 million people, we're about 10% down. And then that sounds about right because we're 10% down in restaurants as well. Restaurant jobs were well below. In 36 of the 50 states, restaurant job opening or restaurant jobs right now are well below pre-pandemic levels. So not close to back to where we need to be from an employment perspective. Despite the challenges, overall, the majority of restaurant operators are optimistic, right? Restaurant operators are always optimistic. They're an optimistic group of people. We do believe that the vaccine distribution and loosening of the dining restrictions in most states was a part of that. Now, given that that's changing here in the U.S. right now, in New York, declared it, I think, yesterday. I actually live in the state of Colorado, one of the big square ones in the middle, but I travel here to Chicago, and I'm in the Sears Tower, Willis Tower in downtown Chicago, and they just reimposed the mask mandate on everyone in the Sears Tower. So we're starting to see this wave of mask mandates, and that doesn't bode well for people wanting to dine indoors and having to put masks on and off. So we'll see what happens. So that's literally that. That information is a day or two old. So we often also say that what's happening in the restaurant industry is a good reflection of the overall state of what's happening in America, given that we are 1 in 10 jobs in America is somehow related to food service. We're a very big part of our economy, the second or third largest industry by economics as well. In January, 8% of restaurant operators rated the recruitment and retention of their workforce as their top challenge. By May, that number had risen to 72%, a 9-fold increase. Now, I will tell you, since I've been involved with the food service industry the last 5 or 6 years, labor has always been number one or number two in terms of the issues. For about a year and a half, it dropped off because it was just COVID, trying to stay open, tax problems, economic problems were way higher. And we're back up to labor. Now, labor is going to be the number one, and it's going to continue to be that, I'm sure. The association, our association released results from the latest operator survey indicated that employee recruitment is a top concern. 90% of respondents said recruiting and retaining employees will likely be more difficult after the pandemic is over than it was before the pandemic started. And it was already number one or number two. So it's going to continue to be a problem. And I will say one of the things that we focus on as an association is building programs to encourage young people into the restaurant industry and the food service industry. We make our training more and more available in the formats that young people are more apt to engage with, whether it's online, it's at their schools, in a number of places, and trying to also encourage parents to recognize that restaurants are a wonderful career opportunity for young people as well. It's not all just flipping burgers or serving drinks, that there are long-term careers available in the food service industry. Most of our operators don't expect staffing levels to return to normal before the end of this year, by the way. And I think with the latest closures, I think it probably will spread into the first quarter of next year before we start seeing things back to normal. There have been this shortage of workers too. There have been some critics that say it's all about the unemployment benefits as a part of the labor shortage. You know, we pushed out some pretty aggressive unemployment benefits in the U.S. Indeed, that probably had some impact on it, but it's way more than that. It's a number of issues playing out in several industries. When the pandemic closures happened, a lot of people had to leave the workforce because they were their family's primary caregivers and breadwinners. So we lost a lot of people, and I'll leave the names of the big, giant delivery and retail companies out of here, but they hired millions of people because they were delivering critical food and merchandise to our homes. So those companies grew rather dramatically while restaurants shrank rather dramatically. So it's going to take a while till we reach some equilibrium and we get the employment base back to where it's kind of even in what we need. People want to get out, and they want to get out into the public and go sit down at restaurants and bars and cafes, and that's going to take people. The other thing is that in our industry, our restaurant industry, they were certainly subject to the whims of government closures and ever-changing capacity restrictions. I think whims in English can be a kind of a pejorative, a negative term. Let me just say it's different. It was so different in different states and different cities. It was hard for restaurateurs, especially those that had multiple units, to understand what to do. And so sometimes they would change rather rapidly. And in fairness to those local governments, the guidance they were giving was being changed very, very quickly. We were learning about the virus and how it spread and how it didn't. And as we have an English saying, 2020 hindsight is perfect, right? So, you really can't judge people from what they did 6 months ago, what they tried to do. But it hit the food service industry disproportionately. We were the ones who had to close completely. There were a lot of other industries that had the ability to move people out and spread them around. And so it did hit our industry rather disproportionately, which is why we went for a lot of government support when we tried to figure out what we could do to keep our industry alive. So looking ahead, we're encouraged by the increasing vaccination rates. We were talking about that. Some of the rates that you have in Brazil are increasing. The state that I live in is at about 70 to 75% vaccinated. They think they're 85% immune because of people who have had it. So when you add it all together, we're in a pretty good spot. Some of our big cities are not. Some of the minority populations are less than 60% vaccinated right now, with 40% still indicating unwillingness to become vaccinated. So we have some political and messaging communication challenges in the U.S. we're going to be dealing with. It's important for us to get it right because we have to get people back into being able to be with each other And you can't do it by assuming, Terry does have it, Marco doesn't, who has a mask, who doesn't have a mask. None of those kind of rules are scalable. So we have to get it fixed. So like I said, right now, there's a pent-up demand for restaurants and a bunch of stimulus money in the economy. So that is helping push people back out. We can keep them coming out and get them, even with masks, to come out. That'll be great. Tourism also plays a big role in the recovery for many cities. Right now, as people become more comfortable traveling to see friends and family, that's going to push some recovery. We all know people. I have been on airplanes dozens of times this year already, and I was on airplanes after March of last year. I was barely on an airplane for 9 months. So travel is starting again, and a very large percentage, I think it's $1, $2, or $3 in every 10 is attributable to travel, and business travel specifically in the U.S. in many restaurant chains. So in summary, we expect 2021 to be a year of rebuilding. We think the U.S. restaurant industry is going to continue to, we have come a long way here by August. We'll see what September does to us and what the Delta variant, or if there's a epsilon or a lambda or something after that, but hopefully these become less. So one of the other things that we want to talk about were major trends. And so I'd just like to talk about a few things that we're seeing in the industry right now. Some of these trends that were accelerated by the pandemic, we think a lot of them will probably be permanent. Just as an aside, we do the bulk of the food safety training in the U.S., a product called ServSafe. We deliver about 90% of the mandated certificates in ServSafe. We moved very dramatically to online proctoring for those tests, like within 2 months. We had to. We couldn't get people together to train them in a classroom. So we actually did that, and that's not going to change. Now that we are online with a much easier, less expensive variant for our clients, that's probably going to stay. We're going to see a lot of the same things happen with the restaurant operators. Our research indicates that increased use of off-premises is going to continue. During this pandemic, I had to learn how to use, Grubhub and DoorDash and all of these delivery tools, which I never did. My kids all did. My kids that are in their 20s and 30s, they did it all the time. Well, now you got people much older engaging with that and finding that it's a lot of fun. Menu streamlining was a big part of what got a lot of people through. They really shrunk down their menus, and that helped with their supply chain, that helped with their food ordering. They really did not focus on the dietary specific, gluten-free, vegan and those kinds of things. They really focused in on comfort food and what people would order and take away. Now, I don't think that'll stay forever. People will want their vegan food and all those kinds of things, but I think they'll creep back in a little more slowly. We also saw the first time in the U.S. the ability to do alcohol delivery. And as most of your operators know, alcohol, wine, drinks, and things that go along with the dinner come at a much higher margin for the restaurant operator. They really do provide a lot of the profit base for most operators, certainly in the U.S. That's very true. I suspect it's true. In the establishments I've been in Sao Paulo, there were plenty of drinks. So I suspect it's the same.
Caipirinhas.
Yes, absolutely. So nearly 40 states. 40 of the 50 states allow alcohol to go, cocktails to go, which was never allowed in the U.S. You could not, so I can go to my favorite, Brazilian restaurant and order some kind of drink with it, and it'll have a top on it with a seal on it, but I can take the drink home as well. And that I think will stay. And most of the state legislatures are now enacting laws that allows that to stay a permanent part of the delivery in our business. So that opens some new opportunities for our operators. Many of our operators did pretty well during this with all of the takeout and delivery kind of food. Doesn't work for every kind of food, but it did for those operators. A big trend that we also saw prior to the pandemic, before it started, was a huge integration of technology in the industry, whether it was back of house, front of house, customer experience. All those pieces really were starting to get more and more integrated. We at the National Restaurant Association have have a beautiful graphic that shows 7 or 8 major technology areas and the hundreds of companies that compete in each one of them for those technology dollars. So, while we could, expect to see increased dependency on this technology, we also think it's going to offer really nice advantages, and certainly consumers have voiced a clear demand for it in restaurants. So restaurants can start to upgrade their experience and be faster with the bill, allow faster ordering. You don't necessarily have to wait. If you can click on something and push it, and all of a sudden food is coming out, from the kitchen for you, that's a better experience, and you're going to see more of that. They're going to rely heavily on online orders, obviously, looking up locations, directions, hours. More than half of the adults reporting using a restaurant menu online in the last year. That is a huge increase from the previous couple of years. Half of adults in America report wanting to see more technology in restaurants, to make that payment and the ordering easier, as I said. It improves customer service rather dramatically, and certainly offers a way more convenient takeout and delivery option. I'm noticing during the restaurants that I frequent, they're starting to have specialized windows, specialized doors to walk in to get your pickup, your takeout, so you're not, stumbling over the people who are going in to actually eat on premise. And some of these restaurateurs have shared with me that their volumes are way up over 2019 because they're offering both now, and that they've got people back in and they continue to have that takeaway service. So I think anything that all our industry associations can do to help with continuing that online and that takeout and to allow that, I think is going to help people more so in the long run than we maybe thought. So, in terms of mindset, I think one of the most important skills that our operators have really had to focus on and are going to have to continue to focus on, as we're seeing this week, is flexibility. I saw people put restaurant concepts together overnight, figuring out how to go from something that was a pure experience indoors to something that was outdoors with a barbecue pit and people running around with cocktails on roller skates or whatever. They did anything to attract people into their venue and provide an experience. And I think that flexibility is still going to have to be there. We're starting to see, as we said, the Delta variant, which I know we're all tired of hearing about already, and it's only been a couple of months we've been on Delta. It will be replaced by Lambda, by Epsilon, by something. Hopefully not as bad. Hopefully they keep getting weaker and weaker, but we're going to have to be flexible, whether it's moving back to space, putting masks on, taking them off, making sure, we always recommend that the staff stay masked, that for their own protection, really seeing so many people coming through, that at least they stay masked, they're reducing their chance of either getting or passing on. And the individual patrons coming in, they take their, they make their own personal risk assessment in some cases. As that becomes all masked, we won't have the choice. So again, let's be flexible. Have those masks available. Make sure people can sit outside if they don't want to have a mask. Get back out and do those sidewalk cafes. We still have a few months in the northern hemisphere here, anyway, of warm weather, and you guys are, always pretty warm down there. But it's probably going to get better coming forward, into the winter. So, in closing, and then we have a lot, I'm sure, more we can talk about. We see, obviously, a whole lot of work ahead of us. We have certainly done a lot in terms of being able to get the kind of funding that we needed out of our government to support the businesses. We secured $28 billion in restaurant revitalization funding. We see more of that having to happen. We just really do. So I think there's certainly industry, and I think these kind of communications around the world are helpful because we don't have all the best ideas over here, and we constantly are looking to Europe and Latin America and Asia. Although we have very different lifestyles in some of those areas, one of the things we all do like to do is come together and break bread with each other. And that's something where we have to learn how to do it safely and do it within the confines of the science and certainly the pandemic that we're dealing with. So with that, are there some questions that you would like to ask or things that I haven't covered that I might be able to cover?
Well, everything was covered, but just to speak about two kind of concepts that we are seeing more in US and Brazil. drive-through and drive-ins are growing faster than other concepts in US?
Absolutely. The drive-through companies. In fact, one of our board members has a business. It's frozen custard and steak burgers, and they have been very successful throughout this because a bulk of his business is drive-through. Now, one of the challenges is that in some of the more urban areas, it's hard to get a drive-through big enough. Because when that's all you have, when you're closed with the dining room. There's a very famous burger chain in the U.S. that just built their largest chain ever in the little town that I live in Denver, and they have enough room for 70 cars in the drive-through. So they've got 3 lines of drive-through that wrap around this building before it goes out onto a street. And even with that, the local police had to direct traffic for 4 city blocks around this restaurant to maintain the traffic. So yes, drive-throughs are very, very popular. I've seen mock-ups now of some of our famous, we've got some very large, fast-growing chains who have never done drive-throughs, who now have a multi-drive-through model that's going. It looks like in the U.S. we used to have drive-through banking before ATMs, and there would be 4 or 5 cars. Now they have 4 or 5 car drive-throughs for burritos and things like that. So it is happening. It's expensive. It works in the suburban, in the more rural areas where there's space and where the traffic isn't super congested. It's hard to do that in downtown Chicago. One of the McDonald's headquarters is just a few blocks away from our tower here, and I know I'll drive by that tonight on the way to my hotel. I'm curious to see what they're doing with their drive-through. It's a pretty big piece of land for downtown Chicago, but it isn't. It was more parking lot than drive-through. I suspect it's a lot of drive-through right now.
Oh, yes. And about drive-ins like Sunny, I don't know. Yes.
Yeah,
growing faster too, yeah?
Yep. They've done very well. Again, another member company of ours, one of the big investors in Sonic, they have done very well. They were never quite as impacted because they could mask up and they could take food. It was like they were already set for delivery. They are a delivery. They're not even a restaurant. They're a restaurant, but they're not a restaurant. They're a drive-in. So it worked. And they are one of the ones that did pretty well. They didn't lose a lot of business as they went through the year. They were one of the ones that stayed open. A lot of them closed for a week or two while they kind of got their wits about them. And again, a part of their biggest challenge is, and I don't mean to make light of them not having challenges. They have to keep their employees safe. They had to worry about the masking and the gloving and all the things that we did early on. Now it's more about masking than anything else. And I think, given that they're outdoors mostly and masks, I think they'll be okay.
Wow, Terry, was terrific. Thank you so much for your information, for your details. And we're glad to see you here. And we want to be more cooperative with National Restaurant Association and Brazil. We want more of that. Sure. And yes, for sure, we want to increase that kind of exchange of knowledge that you gave us today. We had about 5 minutes to talk before this time, and I want to share more and to have more opportunities to grow with our information, to grow with education. Of course, in Brazil, we have the same challenge: education and more science. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think that we have some of good information and not so good, but for us it's very important to see what happened. And I want your last, if you want to say last words to say goodbye for us, it was wonderful to hear here.
Well, again, thank you for hosting me. I'd love to be able to spend more time with you and actually hear more about what's happening. So I'll have to invite myself to one of your congresses at some point so I can hear how you're handling things, because we all have great ideas for these things and we have to try them all out and see what works. Mostly about getting our people back into restaurants, keeping our employees safe, improving the safety of how we deliver food, and all of us recognize that the food service industry is a major part of every economy in the world. We have to keep it going, and anything that you come up with great ideas, or if there are things that we can help you with from an information perspective, we certainly invite you to reach out. We're happy to help our brother and sister organizations around the world.
Thank you so much, Terry. And see you next time soon.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Tendências mudam sempre. E uma empresa tem duas opções: esperar a mudança ou liderar o caminho. Nós escolhemos estar à frente, conectar pessoas e negócios de um jeito inteligente. Nos envolvemos e aprendemos para oferecer soluções melhores. Porque a única coisa que nunca vai mudar é a nossa vontade de inovar para todo mundo crescer. Alelo é tudo isso.
Seara Gourmet apresenta a sua mortadela duplamente defumada. Ela é gourmet em todos os sentidos. Veja, toque, sinta, prove. Mortadela Seara Gourmet duplamente defumada.